Hi, my name is Annalisa Mansukhani. I'm a writer, curator, researcher based between New Delhi and Hyderabad. I'm here talking about my exhibition, Moving the Bones, which marks the culmination of my grant with the Art Scribes Award supported by Prameya Art Foundation and the French Institute in India. For the last, I think, for the last several years, I've been thinking around family photographs and writing around creative practices, engaging with the same. This exhibition and the research that sort of preceded it allowed me to think further with other practices, exploring inquiries, directions, and different creative expressions around the image. What this exhibition brings together are 10 artists, 10 practices, unique, different in many ways, thinking with the family photograph and the family archive across 3 intersecting, overlapping axes. The first looks at the invisible gendered labor of memory. I was deeply interested in how women tend to and keep photographs, archives, and images of their own sort of familial sphere. So some of the practices here think with that. The second axis is the archival, a tangent that one cannot help but think with when one approaches the family photograph. And the archive here kind of opens up into very different, sometimes deinstitutionalized spaces. The archive becomes something that is inherited but also disowned, which is an interesting sort of texture that one is able to think with here. The third tangent, which is also a slightly newer approach for me thinking within this larger research of the family photograph, is the image as estranged terrain, the family photograph, or the familial image, as I'm phrasing it here, as something unrecognized, as something spectral, almost ghostly. And the practices here that do engage with it look at the image as a site that can be taken apart, can be undone, and really sort of reimagined afresh. The 10 practices here think with one or more than one, and in some cases all of these axes coming together in a configuration that I'm calling the familial image, something that sort of exceeds the materiality of the photograph in the album or the photograph on the wall, and instead sits with and thinks with its larger economy of kinship, desire, estrangement, ownership, and pleasure. So what you're also seeing here with Moving the Bones is a larger conversation with how family photographs, or the familial in this case, is never stable, never benign, and it's always something that's open to a lot of new inquiry. So this is Alina Tifine's work titled The Liturgy of the Lost Bird. The work was first shown as part of Jai Singh Nageshwaran's curation at the Chennai Photo Biennale. The curation was titled Roots That Reach for the Sky, and when the exhibition traveled to the Museum of Art and Photography, it was showcased there as well. This is the first time this body of work is showing in Delhi, and it's a very exciting moment for me especially to be able to engage with this in a completely new context and a space. So Alina's work as a photographer and as a writer is very interesting because she works with a number of layers, a number of references, and sort of modes of reading that invite you to come much closer with the image and to really think with what it means to work with an archive like hers. For me, when I approached the work, I approached it in a very writerly fashion because that's what the work threw up for me, and that's just my perspective of it. But what are I think 2 tangents that kind of one can talk about here that one can see from the work are the first being a sort of a thread of maternal grief that Alina deals with, one that engages with the story of her grandmother and her mother and their intertwined lives in a family. In addition, this work also references a really beautiful 16th century Shaivite text that talks about Madurai as a sacred landscape and its sort of foundations in the body and in the life of Meenakshi, a warrior queen goddess who continues to be worshipped even until today. And Meenakshi, the myth goes that Meenakshi upon her birth was born with 3 breasts. And in her 3-breasted sort of existence, her body existed in a certain kind of excess and illegibility. The prophecy around her birth was that the 3rd breast would disappear when she met her mate, her partner, her counterpart, and it so does disappear when she meets Shiva in battle. But in the interstice, in that interstice of her existing as a three-breasted woman, Meenakshi's story has also been read into with feminist and queer lenses, which is a very interesting sort of approach to thinking with literature and mythology. The ways in which Alina has also incorporated this myth into this work as a reference, but also as a way of thinking about how queer lives and queer bodies exist in that similar excess and illegibility. What are the ways in which one can also read queer lives and queer presences within family archives that often tend to get marginalized, often tend to get sidelined, or in some cases do not exist at all. So what you see here are small acts of witnessing, many acts of witnessing that sort of coexist alongside family photographs, archival images that Alina had sort of sieved through her own family archives, as well as her images as a photographer that she's been sort of attending to within this larger assemblage that draws from the ritual of a liturgy that is in itself an expression of faith and belief. So the work here within, I think, the context of this exhibition exists also in incompletion and almost in a sense of something being constantly in progress, accumulating many ways of reading, which to me as a curator and as someone also writing alongside a lot of these works was very exciting to think with. So I'm standing in front of an excerpt from Srinivas Kuruganti's massive archive from New York in the 90s. This excerpt is also on its way to being part of a larger project around a photo book from his lives, his years in New York. Here in this exhibition, this excerpt is titled The New York Diaries, and Srinivas Kuruganti is a Delhi-based photographer working with the Analog Approach project, which is something that he started inviting practices to think with slower makings of the image and darkroom practices. This excerpt here is a very exciting addition to the roster of artists and the roster of works here at Moving the Bones, because it extends the conversation around the familial image into one thinking with kinship in particular and community. A lot of Srinivas's images think with his own distanced South Asian identity at the time when he was living in New York. And here we also see many acts of witnessing a city in turmoil, a city in flux, because New York in the 90s was quite riotous, it was aflame. So a lot of the images here kind of have these undertones and sometimes quite explicit overtones of protest, of sex, of desire, of visibility, sometimes quite literally of bodies on the street. So a lot of the lives you see here are also thinking with what it means to be visible together, what it means to come together. And the excerpt is a really beautiful way of also reckoning with what friendship as a thread within the familial can bring up in conversation. It's really exciting to have this excerpt be here, part of Moving the Bones in Delhi and also in a country like India that is constantly rethinking its conversations with bodies, with queer bodies, with trans bodies, with bodies that exist in a certain kind of illegibility. And the protests and the politics that one sees in Srinivas's images could almost be parachuted into our context today. And the excerpt here is one that really kind of continues Srini's own conversations with community, with photographing, and like photography as a practice and community as a practice. And I think it's a really beautiful excerpt that comes together, that is really editorial as well in the way that it is displayed, speaking to Srini's years as a journalist, as a photo editor. And I think what's also interesting is that the work exists as an archive in conversation with Alina's work as well, and this meeting that both the works almost perform here are also a conversation around the ways in which archives can look like. Alina's, I think, archival tendency leans more into the speculative, into really taking the constitution of an archive apart, while Srini's is a much more, I think, layered approach to how one thinks with chronology and time and the actual accumulation of images painstakingly made over several years. And both speak to each other in incredible ways, incredibly poetic ways. And I think it's a really timely citation of queer lives, of queer excess this June. So the exhibition Moving the Bones is on view until 24th June at Shrine Empire, New Delhi in Defence Colony. And while the exhibition would mark a closing on 24th, the conversations I'm hoping will still continue, not just with the artists on display here, but with practices and people really thinking about what the image stands for today.